Her name was Clara Mae Coulter, and her world had been darkness long before the fire stole what little she had left. She'd lost her sight at 15, scarlet fever, the doctor said. Her mother passed soon after, left in the care of her brother, and his new wife Clara had been a shadow in her own home. They said she was too fragile for the new life out west, but still they brought her. When the fire came, set by raiders or a drunken accident no one would know, Clara was the only one left alive to crawl from the flames. But how could a blind woman survive in the dead of winter, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by wolves, ice, and silence? Clara followed one thing, the sound of a creek. For 2 days she sang hymns through cracked lips, using her voice as a compass, hoping someone, anyone, might hear her, and someone did. His name was Hawk That Watches, a young Mandan scout exiled from his own tribe, wandering the woods in silence. When he heard that broken hymn drifting over the water, he thought it was a spirit. What he found instead was a ghost of a girl, shivering and blind, but singing still. What happened next would break your heart and change the lives of 2 lost souls who never should have crossed paths. The town of Bitter Creek was little more than a spittle of shanties and saloons clawed into the edge of the Dakota plains, where dust settled into every wrinkle and hope went to die. The year was 1872, and the railroad hadn't yet carved its way this far west. Bitter Creek had a general store, a half-rotten church with a preacher who drank more than he prayed, and a jail with no sheriff, only a deputy who kept to his corner and didn't ask questions. On the outskirts stood the Coulter Ranch, a tired patch of land dotted with dry cottonwoods, a weather-beaten barn, and a 2-room cabin that groaned in the wind. It had been built by Harlan Coulter, Clara's older brother, with blistered hands and whiskey in his breath. He had dragged Clara west after their mother died in Tennessee, declaring she'd be of some use yet, even blind. Clara Mae Coulter was 23, but looked older from the quiet weight she carried. Her blindness had taught her to listen, better than most folks talked. Every creak of floorboard, every shift in the wind, told her more than sight ever had. But in Bitter Creek, that gift meant nothing. To the townsfolk she was the ghost-eyed girl, the strange one who sat on the porch humming hymns while others worked or drank. Her world was texture and sound, the rough weave of her apron, the warmth of sun across her cheek, the sharp whistle of a hawk overhead. She cleaned the house, swept the dirt floors, and churned butter by feel. Her brother's wife, Minna, had no patience for her slowness. "She's just another mouth to feed," Minna spat one morning, unaware Clara stood by the doorway, useless as a broken plow. Clara heard everything. She always did. At night, she lay in her corner of the cabin, separated by a thin hanging sheet, and tried to recall her mother's voice. But the memory faded more each day, blurred by time, and the cruelty of this land. Saturdays brought the Coulters into Bitter Creek for supplies. Clara never entered the store. Minna said she frightened the customers. Instead, Clara would sit on the porch rail, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the wagons pass, the children run, the clatter of hooves, and, always, the whispers. "That's Harlan's blind sister, ain't it? She talks to herself. Some say she sings to ghosts. She's cursed, you know. Her mama died on account of her." The worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was the truth Clara feared in it. She wanted to speak. She wanted to scream. But no one cared for what a blind girl thought in a town that barely remembered her name. Days were an endless loop of chores and silence. Her brother barely spoke unless it was to bark orders. Minna handled the money and meals, treating Clara like a shadow, something always there, always unwelcome. Clara rose before the sun, her bare feet finding the cold floorboards by memory. She milked the goat, cleaned the hearth, washed clothes, in a metal basin until her hands were raw. She'd long since memorized every nail and knot in the cabin wood. Once, years ago, she'd asked if she might teach music to the schoolchildren in town. Harlan had laughed so hard he spit out his chew. "You think anyone's gonna let their young'uns learn from a blind girl? You don't even know if you're playing right." Clara had never asked again. Still, on quiet nights, when the wind died and the fire burned low, She would sing softly. Songs her mama taught her before the fever took her eyes. Her voice, clear and low, floated over the hills like smoke. It was the only part of herself she still claimed. Then came the preacher's boy, bitten by a rattler near the creek. He died 2 days later. No one said it outright, but Clara heard. What the others muttered when they thought she wasn't near. He saw her just before it happened. She was singing by the creek that morning. Maybe she called it. They didn't need to say more. Clara felt it in how the townsfolk avoided her. Even the school teacher, sweet Miss Donner, stopped waving when she passed. By summer, Clara knew. The town had made up its mind. And in a place like Bitter Creek, folks didn't change their minds. They buried them. The change came on an ordinary morning, hot and still, with flies buzzing over the sour milk in the trough. Harlan had ridden off early, and Minna was scrubbing, clothes in the back. Clara sat alone on the porch, hands folded, face tilted toward the sun. Then she heard it, the crunch of wagon wheels on the gravel path, a sound that didn't belong. She rose, brushing dust from her apron. She stepped down and turned her head, listening. A voice called out, "Male, not Harlan." "You Harlan Coulter's place?" Clara nodded, her voice soft. "Yes, sir. He's not here just now." Silence. Then the man climbed down. She heard boots hit earth, heard the jingle of saddle buckles. "Got a letter here for a Miss Clara Mae Coulter." Clara's breath caught. "A letter? For me?" Marked urgent. She heard the envelope pressed into her hand. She could feel the stamp, the crispness of fresh paper, something official. Minna came stomping out, barking questions at the man, but Clara didn't hear her. All she could do was hold that letter against her chest as if it might vanish. That night, after the dishes were done and the house had gone, quiet, she unfolded the letter with careful fingers. The words were few, but they rang like thunder. "Clara, you are requested to present yourself at Fort Laramie. A position is opened for a singer to assist with the chapel services. You come recommended by a traveling preacher who heard your voice. The fort will provide travel and lodging. Reply if interested." Chaplain R. Thorne. Clara stared at the page, her hands trembling. A job, a chance, a way out. She didn't sleep that night. For the first time in years, she didn't want to. The sky hung low over the plains that morning, heavy with the weight of a coming storm. The letter clutched in Clara's bag was wrinkled at the corners from how often she'd touched it, reread it in her mind, and traced its edges with trembling fingers. A neighbor's boy had driven her in his wagon 2 days' ride from Bitter Creek to Fort Laramie, silent the whole way, except for a muttered "good luck" as he dropped her by the wooden gate and rode off. Clara stood still for a long time, her boots quiet on the gravel, her cane tapping gently as she listened. Soldiers moved somewhere in the distance, mules brayed. And then, a voice, rough, dry as dust, coated in suspicion. "You the blind girl they sent from Bitter Creek?" She turned toward the sound. "Yes, I'm Clara Coulter." A long silence stretched between them. "Well, you ain't what I asked for." The voice belonged to Levi Cutter, a rancher and war veteran with a face carved from stone and eyes like scorched earth. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick gray coat slung over one side like he didn't much care for uniforms or people. His name carried weight out here. Folks whispered that he'd buried 2 wives and didn't mourn either one. Clara squared her shoulders, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was told the fort chapel needed a singer," he scoffed. "They sent me a blind girl who sings hymns? Hell, I asked the chaplain for a housemaid. My cabin's full of dust and silence, not sinners in need of saving." From behind the gate, a few men chuckled, low, cruel, assuming she couldn't hear. Clara swallowed her pride. "I don't clean well, but I can cook. I know how to keep a fire going, and I don't take up much space. Don't talk back." Levi's tone was sharp. "I'm not hiring you, not properly. You'll stay a week. You do more good than harm, I'll think on it. You burn the beans, I send you back." Clara nodded, jaw clenched. "Fine," she said softly. 1 week. Levi's ranch sat 7 miles west of the fort, tucked into a stretch of broken land, known as Silence Ridge, where wind never stopped and wolves watched from the hills. The cabin stood alone, surrounded by brittle grass and bones bleached by sun. Clara rode beside him in silence, every jolt of the wagon wheel echoing her own nervous breath. He didn't speak, not once. At the ridge, he helped her down, rough hands brushing hers as he steadied her. She expected he'd let go quickly, but he didn't. For just a breath, he held her hand in his, calloused, warm, and unexpectedly still. Then he dropped. "It kitchens through that door," he muttered. "Water pumps out back. I expect the place cleaned before dark." Clara stepped inside. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke, leather, and loneliness. Dust blanketed everything, just as he'd said. But it was the silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. No laughter, no warmth, no life. The next morning, Clara joined Levi on a trip to the nearby trading post for supplies. He said little to her, but she heard plenty from the town. Women stared. Men whispered. She the blind one? Thought he swore off women after what happened to Sarah. She don't even look him in the eye. Someone snickered. "She can't, you dolt." One woman murmured loud enough for Clara to hear. "I give it 3 days." Levi heard it too. His jaw tightened and he walked faster. By the 3rd day, the silence between them snapped. "I boiled beans and biscuits," Clara said gently that evening. "Did you want—" "I didn't ask for dinner," Levi grunted, tossing his gloves by the hearth. "You think you can earn your stay by feeding me like I'm some stray dog?" She flinched. "I only thought—" "That's your trouble. You think. You talk like you got something to offer." He paused. "But you're just another burden the world's tossed at my feet." Clara stood still, her fingers curled at her sides. "You don't know me," she said quietly, "and I don't aim to." And yet, that night, she sat on the porch steps, Kane beside her, and sang, softly at first, a hymn her mother once hummed during storms. Inside, Levi stopped mid-step. That voice. It stirred something long buried beneath soil and ash. He didn't say a word, but he stood by the door a long time listening, and when morning came, he didn't send her away. Not yet. The days passed with the weight of unsaid things. Levi kept to himself, rising before dawn, working the land like he was punishing it. Clara did what she could, cooking, cleaning, tending to small tasks. She moved carefully through the cabin, every step mapped in her mind, every action deliberate. And though they shared a roof, they moved like shadows that never touched. She sang while she worked, soft hymns and old folk tunes. Not for him, at least that's what she told herself, but because they filled the silence. He never spoke of it. Never said he liked it. But some days he paused in the doorway just a little longer, and she knew. Levi spent most of his days in the lower pasture, mending fences or riding the property line. He left early and came home late, his boots heavy, with dust. He never asked how she was settling in, never offered more than a grunt or a nod. Clara didn't push. She knew better than to expect kindness from wounded men. At night, she could hear him outside, chopping wood long after dark. Sometimes she'd sit on the porch and listen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the rhythm of his axe thudding like a heartbeat she wasn't allowed to feel. Once, she heard him stumble, just once. And then, a long silence. She didn't call out, and he didn't ask for help. On a Tuesday morning, Clara swept the porch as Levi rode in from town with supplies. As he unloaded, his hand brushed hers, briefly, unintentionally, and for a split second, they both froze. It was nothing. A moment. But it lingered. He cleared his throat. "Careful with the sugar sack. It split at the corner." She nodded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you." That night, she sang a little louder, and he didn't go outside to chop. Wood word had spread. Levi Cutter had taken in a blind girl. Some said she was a drifter. Others said she was a charity case. Most agreed she wouldn't last the winter. Then came Martha Dixon, a neighbor widow with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She visited uninvited, sweeping into the cabin like she owned the place. "Clara, dear," she said sweetly, examining her from head to toe. "How brave of you to come all this way alone. Must be strange, not seeing your surroundings." Clara smiled politely. "You'd be surprised how much I see." Martha chuckled, then turned to Levi. "You know, folks are talking. A man like you, a girl like her. It's a bit unconventional." Levi's mouth twitched. "So was burying two husbands, Martha. You want a biscuit or not?" Clara nearly choked on her tea. Later that week, Clara heard voices out near the barn. "Don't come sniffing around here, Cale," Levi said low and hard. "I told you I don't deal with men who cheat cattle weights." "I just came to talk, Levi," the stranger replied. "You're looking real settled these days. That girl, she sing to you at night?" There was the sound of boots shifting, a creak of leather. "Get off my land," Levi growled. Cale's laughter faded as his horse carried him off. When Levi returned to the house, Clara didn't ask. But she knew. The past wasn't done with him, not by a long shot. One afternoon, the sky darkened with the weight of an early autumn storm. Clara had just finished setting bread to rise when the front door slammed open. Levi stumbled in, soaked to the bone, blood dripping from his forearm. Clara stood quickly, heart pounding. "What happened?" she asked, voice trembling. "Damn. Barbed wire snapped on the east fence," he muttered. "Horse spooked. I'll wrap it." She moved to the cupboard. "Sit down." I said, "You're bleeding." It wasn't a request. For once, he obeyed. Clara worked silently, her fingers gentle as she cleaned the wound. His skin was warm beneath her touch, his breath unsteady. "Why didn't you come sooner?" she whispered. He looked away. "Didn't want to scare you." "You think blood scares me?" She paused. "I lived through fire. Through men who pretended kindness and then took what they pleased. You're just a man with a wound." Levi said nothing. But when she wrapped the last bandage, his hand brushed hers again, deliberately this time. And he didn't pull away. The next night, Clara sat alone in the dark. The storm had passed, but the wind still whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls. She sat by the hearth, her shoulders hunched, a handkerchief clutched in her lap. Levi found her there. "You all right?" She didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Do you think I'm a burden?" His eyes softened. "No. But I'm blind. And I can't always know what you're feeling. And sometimes that makes me feel small." He took a step forward, then another. "You're not small, Clara." She turned her head toward his voice. Her eyes were pale and searching, and in the firelight he saw the glimmer of a tear slipping down her cheek. "You make this place feel alive again." She blinked. "What?" But he didn't repeat it. He only walked past her, into the cold dark of the night. Clara sat still, fingers trembling, heart thudding in her throat. The wind shifted one morning, carrying with it something more than dust. Clara felt it before Levi even returned from town, an unease that tugged at the edges of her calm. She was kneading dough when the door opened hard against the frame. Levi stepped in, footsteps heavy, shoulders tenser than usual. He didn't speak. He didn't even look her way. Just went straight to the shelf, pulled down the whiskey and poured a shot with shaking hands. "Something wrong?" she asked quietly, wiping her hands on her apron. He drank, then stared into the empty glass. "He's back," he said. Kyle, her stomach tightened. She'd heard that name before, muttered in anger outside the barn, spat with venom when the cattle went missing. Clara didn't ask questions that weren't hers to ask, but now she did. "Who is he to you?" Levi's jaw clenched. "He's someone who should have stayed gone. We rode together once, fought side by side in the war. Then afterward, we worked land together. I trusted him with everything I had left." His voice went cold. He sold me out to a gang that nearly got me killed, lost the North pasture, lost my best horse, and damn near lost my life. He finally looked at her, eyes tired. And now, he's here. Wants a cut of the ranch. Says I owe him. Clara didn't speak. She simply walked to him, placed her hand over his scarred one, and stood there in silence. That night, she heard Levi pacing outside until dawn. 2 days later, Cale came to the Cutter Ranch. Clara was hanging wet linens on the line when she heard a voice, low, mocking, too smooth to be honest. Didn't expect Levi to take in such a pretty house dove. Her spine stiffened. He's not here, she said firmly. He'll be back any minute. Kyle chuckled. Good. Maybe you can sweeten his mood. He's always been a stubborn bastard. He stepped closer. You sing real pretty. Heard it all the way from the creek. Clara didn't answer. She simply turned and walked back toward the house, but not before his voice followed her like a snake in the grass. I wonder what else he hasn't told you. When Levi returned, she told him. His face darkened like thunder. He came here? She nodded. He talked about your debt. Levi didn't explain. He just stormed out and didn't return until... The sun had dipped behind the hills. That night, Clara sat alone by the hearth, waiting for his footsteps. They didn't come. When he finally did return, he didn't speak. Just slammed the door, poured another glass, and sat staring into nothing. Clara stood behind him. You said he betrayed you, she whispered. But it sounds like you still owe him something. His head dropped. That's none of your concern. It is if he keeps showing up on this land, she snapped, louder than she meant. I may be blind, Levi, but I'm not stupid. You're hiding something. He rose slowly, his voice low but bitter. You want the truth? I owed Cale once because I borrowed from him to keep this ranch. Before the war, when I came back, I found out he'd put my land in his name, said I signed it over while doped up on morphine. I didn't remember. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but I wasn't about to beg. Clara's hands trembled. And now, he looked at her then, eyes filled with something harder than anger. Now he wants the girl too. Said I could keep the land if I gave him you. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt it like a blow to the chest. What did you say to him? She asked. Levi looked away. I told him to rot in hell. But the damage had been done. Her voice cracked. You should have told me the moment I got here. If I'm a pawn in some war between two men, I had a right to know. I was trying to protect you, he barked. By lying, by sparing you the fear. You don't think I've lived with worse? Her voice rose, wounded and wild. I lost my sight in a fire set by someone I trusted. I know what betrayal looks like even when I can't see it. Levi stepped back, hurt flashing across his face. I'm not him, Clara. No, she whispered, but you didn't trust me enough to let me choose. And that's just as cruel. She turned toward the door. I need air. Clara, don't follow me, she said, her voice breaking. Not tonight. She walked alone, hands trailing the fence rails, breath shallow as the prairie wind. She felt the night close in, cold and unforgiving. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out, and her steps slowed. The pain in her chest wasn't from fear, but from something more intimate. Disappointment. She had begun to believe in Levi, in the quiet way he listened to her hum, in the rare smile he let slip when she joked about oversalting the stew, but now it all felt like an illusion. She had walked through fire once. She couldn't do it again. Back at the house, Levi sat staring at the empty hearth. He ran a hand through his hair, then stood and paced. He didn't know how to fix what he'd broken. Didn't know how to speak without hurting. All he knew was that the quiet in the cabin no longer felt peaceful. It felt like punishment. And out there in the distance, Clara leaned against a cold fence post and let herself cry quietly into the wind, wondering if she'd made a mistake ever, coming west. The clouds rolled in without warning, thick and bruised, churning low over the hills like an army set to descend. The wind picked up in wild gusts, tossing dust and brittle leaves across the Cutter Ranch as if nature itself had grown restless. Clara stood by the porch, hand resting on the rail, her face tilted toward the rising storm. She felt it in her bones, the tension, the heaviness in the air. Inside, Levi moved quickly, barking orders to the hands, trying to bring in the scattered cattle before lightning cracked the sky. But the sky was faster than all of them. By the time the first strike lit up the heavens, the storm was already upon them. Rain fell in sheets, fast and angry, and the barn doors left unlatched in the chaos banged open and shut like a warning drum. Levi raced across the mud, soaked through, just as the sharp smell of smoke twisted into the air. "Lightning hit the barn!" someone yelled. Flames licked up the far corner, catching on dry hay. Levi didn't think, just ran, boots sinking in muck. He didn't see Clara leave the porch. She moved with practiced grace, following the sound of shouts, of hooves bucking inside a burning stable. She'd always been afraid of fire, ever since the night it stole her sight, but this time someone else was inside. She heard it before she saw it. Levi's voice, strained and close to panic, shouting to free a trapped colt. Clara didn't hesitate. Her hands reached the splintered edge of the door, and she ducked inside the smoke, following the heat, the low cries of an animal in distress. "Clara, get out!" Levi shouted when he saw her silhouette in the doorway, but she ignored him, reaching for the latch, fumbling until it gave. The colt burst past her and a beam above groaned. Levi lunged forward just as it fell, grabbing her around the waist and pulling her down hard. The beam crashed where she'd stood seconds before. "Are you insane?" he barked, dragging her out, shielding her with his body. "You could have been killed." Her chest heaved, her hands shaking. "So could you," she snapped back, "and I wasn't going to stand there and listen to it happen." Rain soaked them both now, washing away soot and ash as they stood inches apart. "I told you to stay away from danger," he said, his voice low, trembling with something deeper than anger. "And I told you not to decide what's too much for me," she whispered. He stared at her, breathing hard, eyes searching her face like a man lost at sea. "You're not just someone I took in, Clara," he finally said, voice raw. "You're the only thing that makes this place feel like it might matter again." She froze, mouth slightly parted, and for a moment the wind and the rain and the fire all disappeared. There was only his voice, barely above a whisper. "I don't know when it started. Maybe the day you sang by the creek. Maybe when you reached for my hand without fear. Maybe tonight." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Her throat tightened, and something warm and sharp filled her chest. "Levi," she said softly, barely breathing. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth through the cold storm. His hand brushed against hers, hesitant, unsure. She didn't pull away, but neither of them moved to close the space completely. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything they wanted to say but couldn't. The fire was out now, smoldering in the background. The barn stood charred, but the ranch still breathed, stubborn and scarred. Clara turned her face upward, toward where she imagined his eyes were. She didn't speak, didn't ask what came next. Levi didn't kiss her, didn't promise anything. He just looked at her with a softness that hadn't been there before. And for the first time in weeks, they stood together. Not as strangers forced to share a roof, but as two broken souls daring to trust that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to stay broken forever. The wind howled around them, the storm moved on, and they said nothing more. The days that followed the fire were quieter, but not calmer. Something unspoken stretched between Clara and Levi, like a string pulled taut, too delicate to break but too painful to ignore. He threw himself into repairing the barn, working from dawn till dark, barely speaking, while she tended to the animals, and the house with aching hands and an aching heart. Every time she thought he might say something, anything, he turned away. And when the town's spring gathering came, Clara almost didn't go. But Mrs. Abernathy insisted, dragging her into town with promises of music and pies and a little color on your cheeks, dear. Levi didn't say a word when she left. Didn't offer to walk her, didn't ask her to stay. So when Marshal Graham offered his arm with a kind smile and a loud voice, Clara took it, grateful for someone who saw her, if only for a moment. The townsfolk watched her like hawks, whispering behind fans and into hats. The blind girl who set her sights too high. Levi Cutter's charity case. Bet he's tired of her by now. Clara kept her chin up. She danced with Graham once, smiled politely, and sat alone as the music faded. And that's when she heard it. His voice, low and serious, speaking with Old Man Dalton near the edge of the saloon. "I'll sell by the end of the month. I'm done with it all. The land, the fight. It's time to let go." Her chest clenched. She stood frozen, the music turning to noise around her. He hadn't told her. Hadn't said a word about leaving, about ending it all. When she returned to the ranch the next morning, her hands trembling around her shawl, she didn't wait for him to explain. "You're selling it," she said simply. He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I was going to tell you." "When?" she asked, voice hollow. "After you disappeared without goodbye?" He looked at her then, but not with softness, only weariness. "Clara, this land's been dying for years. I stayed longer than I should have." "What about me?" she whispered. "Was I just part of what's dying too?" He didn't answer. She turned away, heart hammering. "Graham asked me to stay in town. Said I'd be safe there. Said I could sing again." "Then maybe you should go," Levi muttered, too quietly. But she heard it, every word, and it shattered her. She left that night, not looking back. The house felt colder, emptier without her. Levi watched the firelight flicker on the empty chair she used to rock in, and cursed himself for every word he hadn't said. The town welcomed Clara with open arms and closed smiles. They gave her shelter, but not warmth. When she tried to sing at the chapel, whispers grew. Too proud. She thought she'd be a rancher's wife. Now look. One Sunday, someone left a scarf tied to the pew, a cruel reminder of her blindness. She smiled through it, sang anyway, but her voice trembled more each time. Levi didn't come to town, not once, not to find her, not to explain. Rumors reached her. He'd sold the cattle, was closing down the ranch, and had already packed. People asked what she'd do next. She smiled again, said she hadn't decided. But inside, everything felt like ash. The spring rains came, and with them, the silence between them turned into something permanent. What they'd built, slow, painful, beautiful, now lay in ruins. At the end of it all, Clara stood alone on the steps of the chapel, wind tugging at her dress, listening to the far-off creak of wagon wheels leaving the edge of town. And Levi Cutter was nowhere in sight. The rain had fallen hard the night Levi Cutter left town. Wagon wheels cut deep into the muddy roads, and the wind howled like it had a bone to pick with the whole world. Levi didn't look back as he passed the chapel, nor when the lights of Mandan faded behind him, but every mile stretched tighter around his chest until the weight of silence became unbearable. By the time he reached the edge of the prairie, he had to stop, hands gripping the reins, jaw clenched. The fire was out back at the ranch. The animals had been sold. The house stood empty and still. Her voice haunted him. Not the way she sang in town, but the quiet way she'd hummed to herself when she thought no one could hear. The way she whispered his name that night she'd found him bleeding from the ridge, her small hand brushing his cheek like he was something worth saving. He leaned forward on the saddle, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and cursed his own foolish pride. He saw it all now. Her blind faith in him, her quiet strength, how she made the cold house feel like more than wood and stone. He remembered the first time she set a cup of coffee by his hand without a word, and how it had tasted like something more than warmth. She hadn't asked for much, just a place to be safe, a place to be loved. And he'd pushed her away, over and over again, because he'd been too scared to believe he deserved her. By the time he turned the horse around, dawn had begun to stretch a dull gray across the sky. Mud splashed high up his boots as he galloped back toward Mandan. He didn't stop to eat, Didn't rest the horse, just followed the road like a man possessed. When he rode into town, the streets were quiet. Church bells were just beginning to ring, calling folks to worship. Levi jumped from the saddle and strode toward the chapel, his hat crushed in his hands, mud caked up to his knees. The doors were open. Inside, Clara stood near the altar in a simple blue dress, one hand on the pew, the other resting gently on her chest as she sang. Her voice trembled slightly, but it was still hers, clear, sweet, reaching every corner of the room like smoke, curling toward heaven. And then it stopped. She'd felt the air shift, heard the boots in the doorway. She didn't turn around, but her whole body stiffened. Levi's voice cracked as he stepped forward, the echo bouncing off the walls. "Clara." She didn't move, didn't speak. So he kept talking. "I ain't got the right words. I've never been good at 'em, but I ain't leavin'. Not again." She turned then, her face pale and unreadable. "You already did." Her voice was flat, but there was a tremor under it. I thought I mattered to you, Levi. And you let me walk away." He took another step, hands trembling. "You matter more than anything I ever had. More than the land, more than the fight, more than my damn name." He swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. "I was scared. I thought I'd ruin you. I thought you deserved better. And I couldn't stand the thought of loving you only to lose you one day." He shook his head. "But I lost you anyway." Clara's lips parted, a breath caught in her throat. He went to his knees right there in the aisle, not caring who might see, not caring what the town would whisper. "I love you, Clara Mae. I love the way you move through darkness like it doesn't own you. I love the way you make a broken man believe he's still worth something. I love you like the land loves the rain after a drought." His voice cracked. "And I will never walk away again, if you'll have me." The silence stretched. Her lip quivered. And then the tears came. Not dramatic, not loud. Just soft rivers down her cheeks, like something had finally been cracked open after months of being shut tight. She knelt beside him slowly, her hand finding his face in that way. She always did, as if she knew exactly where he was without needing sight. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded, covering her hand with his own. "I couldn't breathe without you." She leaned into him then, forehead to forehead, her voice barely a breath. "I was always yours, Levi Cutter. I just needed you to see it." Behind them, the chapel remained quiet, but not empty. A few townsfolk had gathered in the back, silent and still. Mrs. Abernathy wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Even old Dalton stood with arms crossed, watching with something like respect. Levi helped Clara to her feet but didn't let go of her hand. For the first time in a long time, his eyes didn't hold anger or grief. Just clarity. Just hope. They walked out together, the sun beginning to break through the storm clouds at last. And for the first time in her life, Clara didn't wonder where she belonged. She already knew. The dirt road leading back to the Cutter Ranch was still scarred, from the rains, but it felt different underfoot this time, like it wasn't just land but memory, promise, and belonging. Clara rode side saddle beside Levi, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Though she couldn't see the homestead in the distance, she felt every inch of its nearness in her chest. The wind was warm, gentle, carrying the smell of lilac and sun-baked wood. Mandan had watched them go, and Mandan had watched them return. Some townsfolk tipped their hats, some whispered behind curtains, and a few nodded in quiet approval. But neither Clara nor Levi looked back anymore. What the town thought didn't matter now. What mattered was the way his hand closed gently over hers when the trail narrowed, or how he told her what the sky looked like each night, like he was painting it just for her. At the ranch, the front porch still leaned slightly to the left, and the fence still needed mending, but the air carried something new, something tender and solid. Levi helped her down from the horse, his hand lingering at her waist. "We'll build it back up," he said softly, nodding toward the barn, the field, the life they were making from the dust. Together. Clara turned her face toward the breeze, smiling. "We already are." Later that evening, with the light turning gold over the plains, they sat in silence, planting seeds into the earth side by side. His sleeves were rolled up, her dress stained at the knees, and neither spoke for a long while. Just the rhythm of planting, the hush of wind through grass, the quiet understanding that this was theirs now. Levi reached over, brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. She tilted her face to him, and in that moment, dirt under nails, sky above, hearts finally still, they shared their first quiet kiss. No grand gestures, no words needed, just two souls meeting in the space where everything else had finally fallen away. As twilight crept in, Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, listening to the land settle for the night. And Levi, with his arm around her, whispered into her hair, "You're home now, Clara." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The earth beneath them held the truth better than any words ever could. This time, she wasn't going anywhere. She had once believed the world would never make space for someone like her. A blind woman, a burden, forgotten by blood and beaten, down by silence. He had believed his heart was too ruined, too calloused by loss and war and lonely years on the land. But somehow, in a place so dry and hardened by drought and judgment, something soft had taken root. Clara learned that even the darkest path could lead home if she kept singing. Levi learned that the soul doesn't need fixing, it needs forgiving. They built more than a ranch from dirt and timber. They built trust, slow and patient, between broken things. And though the scars never vanished, on her hands, on his heart, they became part of the map that led them back to each other. Love, real love, doesn't crash in like thunder. It lingers in the hush after a storm, in the steady planting of seeds in the hand that doesn't let go. Some still whisper behind curtains, but some stories don't need the town's approval, just the truth between two people brave enough to believe they're worth saving. And sometimes, home isn't a place. It's the sound of your name spoken by someone who never gave up.